My dad raised his glass at my brother's rehearsal dinner and said, "We are so proud of our son, the surgeon. And somewhere out there, our daughter is probably still figuring out what a W-2 is." The table laughed. My future sister-in-law laughed. My aunts laughed. My brother, the guest of honor, the surgeon, the golden child, smiled into his wineglass and said nothing. I was sitting 4 seats down. I heard every word. "My name is Stella. I'm 31 years old. And for the past 6 years, I have been quietly paying the financial foundation under my family's entire life. Their mortgage refinancing, my brother's med school loans when his grants fell short, my mother's car note, my dad's business line of credit when his HVAC company hit a slow winter. Not because anyone asked nicely. Because I couldn't watch them drown and do nothing. That's the thing about being the family's invisible person. You still care, even when you probably shouldn't. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, in a house where achievement had a very specific shape. It looked like my brother valedictorian Division I tennis, Ohio State pre-med, then Johns Hopkins for his residency. It did not look like me. I got a 3.1 GPA. I liked making things. I taught myself Illustrator at 14 using YouTube tutorials and a cracked library computer. I designed logos for my neighbor's pressure washing business for $20 and thought I was rich. My dad would look at my sketchbooks the way people look at someone else's kid at a birthday party, politely, briefly, with no real interest. He was never cruel about it. He just wasn't impressed. There's a particular kind of fading that happens when you realize you are not what your parents envisioned. You don't disappear all at once. You just slowly stop expecting to matter. I went to University of Cincinnati, got a degree in graphic design, and graduated into the tail end of a recession with $43,000 in student loans and exactly one freelance client. A woman named Deborah who ran a small Etsy candle shop and paid me in store credit twice before I made her pay in actual money. My brother came home from his residency interviews in a blazer and talked about fellowship programs over dinner while I ate and said nothing because I had nothing to say that would land the same way. My dad asked him follow-up questions for 45 minutes. He asked me if I was still doing the art thing. I was doing more than the art thing. By the time I was 26, I had built a small but real design and brand consulting business out of my apartment. I had 4 steady clients, a regional credit union, a med spa chain in Columbus, a Nashville-based food truck company that was expanding into brick-and-mortar locations, and a tech startup in Cincinnati that had just closed a Series A and needed a full visual identity from scratch. I wasn't rich, but I was profitable, and I was growing. I didn't tell my family any of this. I know that sounds strange. But I had learned, over years of small moments, that my family processed my work the way people process background music. They knew it was there, technically, but they weren't listening to it. When I mentioned a client win, my mother would say that's sweet and pivot back to whatever my brother was doing. When I said I'd hit my first 6-figure revenue year, my dad said, "Is that before or after expenses?" in a tone that wasn't curious. It was dismissive. So I stopped sharing. I kept my business to myself and I kept my finances to myself, and I let them assume I was still scraping by. What I did not keep to myself was my help. It started the year my dad's business had a brutal winter. Dayton got hit with an ice storm in January that shut things down for 3 weeks, and his HVAC company, which did most of its revenue in heating season, was bleeding cash. He didn't ask me. He mentioned it offhandedly at Sunday dinner in the way people mention things they've already accepted as unsolvable. I transferred $8,000 into his business account that week. I told him it was a loan. He said thank you. He never brought it up again, and neither did I, and he never paid it back. Then my mother's car transmission blew out in April. $4,000. Then my brother needed to cover a gap in his relocation expenses when he moved to Atlanta for his fellowship. $6,000. Just until I get my first attending paycheck, he said. That paycheck came. He bought a Peloton. I'm not angry about those things. I want to say that clearly. I made the choices I made because I thought it was the right thing to do, and because I loved my family even when they made it hard, and because at 27, I was still hoping that generosity would eventually turn into something that felt like being seen. By the time of my brother's rehearsal dinner, I had transferred a total of somewhere around $340,000 into various corners of my family's financial life over 5 years. Some of it was direct transfers. Some of it was me co-signing on a refinanced mortgage because my parents' credit had taken hits they never explained to me fully. Some of it was quietly covering shortfalls in my dad's business line of credit so it wouldn't go to collections. I tracked it all in a spreadsheet I kept on a password-protected drive that I never showed anyone. $340,000. I want you to sit with that number for a second because I had to. I calculated it the night after the rehearsal dinner, sitting in my car in the parking garage of the Marriott, where the wedding party was staying, with the heat running and my coat still on. I hadn't cried in the restaurant. I'd smiled, actually. I'd smiled through the toast and through the dessert course and through my future sister-in-law's bridal party. Doing a group photo that I wasn't asked to be in, even though I was the only sibling. I smiled until I got to my car and then I opened my spreadsheet and I looked at the running total and I thought, what are you doing, Stella? My dad's toast was not the first time something like that had been said. There was the 4th of July when I was 28, and I overheard him tell his brother that my brother turned out great and that I was still finding my way. There was the Christmas my mother mentioned in front of my cousin, that she hoped I'd eventually figure out something stable. There was the time my brother's fiancée, perfectly nice, I actually like her fine, asked me at Thanksgiving what I did for work, and when I said I ran a design consultancy, she said, oh, like freelance? In a tone that made it sound like I alphabetized coupons for a living. I was the family's charity case. Except I was also the family's bank. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from that combination. You're not just unseen, you're unseen while you're actively holding things up. It's like being the load-bearing wall in a house that everyone keeps repainting the trim on, because they think that's what's keeping it standing. The night after the rehearsal dinner, I didn't sleep. I lay in my hotel room and stared at the ceiling and made a decision that felt in the moment more like a release than a plan. I was going to stop, not abruptly, not dramatically. I wasn't going to send an email or call a family meeting or make a speech. I was just going to quietly step back from everything. No more transfers, no more cosigns, no more covering gaps, and let the structure settle without me in it. I wanted to see what would happen, partly out of grief, partly out of something harder to name. The wedding was beautiful. I danced at the reception. I hugged my brother and genuinely meant it when I said I was happy for him. I flew home on Sunday. On Monday, I contacted the bank that held my parents' mortgage refinance, the one I'd cosigned on, and notified them that I was initiating a review of the co-borrower arrangement and requesting to be released from the obligation over the coming months. The bank, per the loan terms, flagged the account for review. I knew it would trigger a conversation. That was the point. I also stopped the recurring transfers I'd been running to my dad's business account, $2,000 a month, which I'd set up 18 months ago to cover a gap in his operating cash flow after he lost a major commercial contract. I just stopped scheduling them. I did not call anyone. I did not explain anything. I just stopped. The first message came on a Tuesday morning, 9 days after the wedding, 8:47 a.m., my dad. Hey, did something happen with the bank? They're asking about the mortgage account. Call me when you get a chance. I read it. I didn't respond. 11:03 a.m., my mother. Stella, your father said there's something going on with the house? I don't understand. They said there's a co-borrower situation. Can you please call us? I was in a client meeting. I didn't respond. 2:15 p.m., my brother. Hey. Mom and Dad are kind of freaking out about some mortgage thing. Do you know what's happening? I found that one almost funny. My brother, calling me. About a financial situation. The surgeon who bought a Peloton with his first attending paycheck and never mentioned the $6,000 again. 4:52 p.m. My dad again. Stella, the business account is also showing some discrepancies. I don't know if you were doing something with transfers, but if you were, we need to talk. This is urgent. I finished my workday. I went for a run. I made dinner. Pasta, nothing special, just something warm. I sat on my couch with my cat on my lap, and I thought about the last 6 years. I thought about $8,000 in January of my 27th year. I thought about $340,000 on a password-protected spreadsheet. I thought about a rehearsal dinner toast and the sound of a table laughing and my brother smiling into his wine. Then I opened my phone and I sent one message to the family group chat. It said, I know what's happening. I'll explain when I'm ready. Please don't call me tonight. They called anyway. I watched the phone ring, 3 times from my dad, twice from my mom, once from my brother. I let them all go to voicemail. The next morning, I called my mom, just my mom. I asked her to be somewhere private. She was in the car, she said. Fine. I told her everything. Not dramatically, not with tears. I'd done my crying in a parking garage 9 days ago. I just told her. I told her about the transfers, about the cosign, about the business account, about the spreadsheet. I told her the total. I told her I had decided to stop. The line was quiet for a long time. We didn't know it was that much, she said. I know, I said. We didn't ask you for all of that. I know, I said again. I gave it because I wanted to help. But I also needed to feel like I was part of this family, and money was the only way I knew how to make that feel true. And I've been thinking about that, and I think I need to stop doing that. She didn't say anything. At the rehearsal dinner, I said Dad made a joke about me not knowing what a W-2 is. Everyone laughed. And I was sitting 4 seats away, and I'd just covered 3 months of his business shortfall, and I stopped. I'm not angry at him, I'm tired, Stella. Her voice was different now, quieter. I'm not cutting anyone off, I said. I'm not disappearing. I just need to stop being the family bank and also the family punchline. That can't be what I am. She didn't argue. That surprised me. I think somewhere she already knew. Mothers usually do, even when they look away from things. The harder conversation was my dad. He called that afternoon and I picked up. He started with logistics, the mortgage, the business account. What did I mean by releasing the cosign? What were the implications? Did I understand this could affect their refinancing rate? He went through it methodically, like a man who was very frightened and was using logistics as a way to not be frightened out loud. I let him go through it, and then I said, Dad, I need to ask you something. He paused. At Marcus's rehearsal dinner, I said, you made a toast. Do you remember what you said about me? Silence. You said Marcus was the surgeon you were proud of, and that I was probably still figuring out what a W-2 is. Stella, that was. I know it was a joke, I said. I know you didn't mean it to be cruel. But I've been hearing versions of that joke my whole life. And I've been showing up anyway. I've been showing up with money I didn't tell you about because I wanted you to be okay, and I wanted to matter to you, and those two things got very mixed up for me somewhere along the way. He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was lower. I didn't know, he said. I didn't know how much, I didn't realize. I know, Dad, that was wrong, he said. What I said, that was wrong. I hadn't expected that. I'd expected defensiveness or another pivot to logistics or a joke to deflect. I hadn't expected him to just say it. Thank you, I said. That matters to me. We stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes. It wasn't a resolution, it was a beginning of something, or maybe a clearing of something. He asked if he could know more about what I actually did for work. I said yes. I told him about my clients, about the credit union and the food truck company, and the Series A startup I'd just done a full rebrand for, that was now being featured in a regional business journal. He listened. Actually listened. He asked follow-up questions for the first time in my memory. It wasn't everything. It was something. I did help with the mortgage situation, not because I owed it, but because the mechanics of releasing a cosign take time, and I wasn't going to blow up my parents' housing out of spite. I stayed on the account through the end of the refinancing period. But I stopped the transfers. I stopped covering the business shortfalls. My dad hired a part-time bookkeeper and a financial advisor and started handling his own cash flow like the adult man he is, and it turned out he was capable of doing that all along. We just hadn't let the situation require it of him. My brother called me 2 weeks after my conversation with my parents. I hadn't reached out to him, he called me. I heard what you said to Mom and Dad, he said. I didn't know about the money. I know, I said. I'm going to pay you back, he said, the $6,000, and anything else. Marcus, I said. That's not why I told them, you don't have to. I want to, he said, and I believed him. I still believe him. We're better than we were. That's the honest answer. Not fixed, not like a movie where the toast scene gets its perfect inverse and everyone cries and hugs, but better. My dad came to visit me in Cincinnati in March. I took him to a client meeting, a small thing, a branding kickoff for a brewery that had just expanded to a second location. He sat in the corner with his coffee and watched me run the meeting. On the drive back to my apartment, he said, "You're good at that, that's it." That's what he said. 4 words. And I thought I was going to have to pull the car over. I've spent a lot of time thinking about why I hid everything for so long. Part of it was protection. If they didn't know, they couldn't minimize it. Part of it was some confused idea that if I kept giving, eventually they would look at me the way they looked at my brother. What I know now is that neither of those things worked. You cannot give your way into being seen, and hiding a life doesn't protect it. It just means you carry it alone. I still run my business. Revenue is up this year. I signed a contract with a regional hospital system that wants a full patient communications rebrand, which is the biggest single engagement I've ever taken on. I have 3 people on retainer now, designers I pay well and trust. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment with my cat, and a very specific pasta collection and a password-protected spreadsheet I still keep, but now it's just for my business finances. The family one I deleted. Some things you track because you have to. Some things you let go of because you deserve to. My dad did not make a toast at Christmas this year. My mother made a toast. She said she was grateful for her family. And she looked at me when she said it, and she said my name, and she said she was proud of me. It wasn't a grand gesture, it wasn't a speech. It was just a woman saying her daughter's name like she meant it, in front of the people who had once laughed. I raised my glass, I said thank you. I didn't cry until I got home.